Commercial part of the program. As Glenn mentioned, I retired, quotation marks, at the end of August 2023. I was retired all of 24 hours. I thoroughly enjoyed my retirement. It's gone now. I'm now the director of the publications for the TSHA. We are the oldest academic organization in the state of Texas. We are the oldest academic press in the state of Texas. We are 107 years old this year. We have over 230 books in our catalog, and I brought a small selection out here that includes my latest book. Apologies, there were other books that I wrote that I was supposed to bring. Amazon saw fit to deliver them day before yesterday, and I've been on the road for a week now. I've actually been in 6 towns in 5 days. Yeah, Midland was one of them. How about that? College Station, Austin, Washington on the Brazos, Huntsville. Yeah, it's been a week. But I'll be here all day. I'll be here till y'all turn out the lights. Man, everybody wanted all their events on November the 8th. I don't know if y'all noticed that, but did they not know the world was not going to end tomorrow? There is next weekend, but nobody's using it. So I'll be home taking a nap. We are the oldest continuously published journal in the country. Nobody has a journal older than us that has never missed an issue. We've been publishing for 128 years. And that includes Massachusetts, Connecticut, Pennsylvania. All those people like to brag. No, Texas has the oldest continuously published journal, and me and Emily Leskowski publish it. We also publish Touchstone for the college students. We publish Texas Historian for the high school students. We have over 28,000 articles in the online handbook of Texas. And some people want us to add more. Tom. 28,001, hopefully in the next couple of weeks or so. What else do? We put out the Writing Line, which is a monthly thing. We host Texas History Day. We originated that in the 1960s. Last year, by that I mean this spring, 65,000 school children in Texas participated. 1,200 of them won at the regional fairs and showed up in Austin for our Texas History Day. You talk about riding herd. You try to ride herd on 1,200 students and their happy families. And the winners went to Washington, D.C., where 9 of our Texans, more than any other state, came home with some sort of award. Very proud of them. So we have educational initiatives, we have publishing initiatives, we have an annual meeting for people to give papers, we do scholarship, we do everything we can possibly do to get a good, solid history initiative in Texas. And that's what we're about. If you want to, catch me afterwards and we can talk about all the other stuff that shows up in Texas Monthly, Texas Observer, etc. I prefer not to clutter my talk with crap. I'm on film saying that, aren't I? Last note, one of the books on the table is mine, and I've just been notified the last few weeks by email from the governor's office. They tell me the governor has appointed me as the next Texas state historian. And my job is to, in my opinion, bring a lot of these groups back together. Let's get involved. Let's work together. Let's work for the kids. Let's work for education, and let's work for publication. And that's students of all ages, from the 4th graders all the way through the continuing ed people who sign up for their Ollie classes at the local college. Yeah, I taught Ollie for 17 years. I'm an old dude. So, what am I going to talk about this morning? A subject that a lot of y'all are familiar with, I'm sure. One of the most commonly quoted sources for history on the Texas Brigade, or really the Civil War as a whole, is a book called A Soldier's Letters to Charming Nellie by Joseph B. Polley. It was published originally by Neal Publishing Company in 1908, 2 years before he then published another book, Polley did, on the history of the Texas Brigade itself. But the big question remains, who's Charming Nellie? And if she didn't exist, What does that say about the veracity of the letters? Are they real if there was no Charming Nellie? Well, I'll give you the punchline up front because that's what historians do. There was a Charming Nellie, and we're going to talk about her. And in my opinion, that goes another step down the road to proving that the letters are definitely real. Now, it also proves that Polley sometimes didn't know what the heck he was talking about. But how many of us are not guilty of that sin every now and then, right? Now, these compilations, these letters, appeared in several different iterations. He originally put them together for the Confederate Veteran magazine, kind of a sequence, and he would kind of dribble them out as he put them together. They were instantly popular, so it seemed natural that he would gather them all together. And this red book you see here is a original copy from 1908 by Neal Publishing Company. Sold a lot of copies. You know, Polley himself had a lot to say. He served in Hood's Texas Brigade for 4 years. This thing sold so well that Butternut Press, and that's the middle one there, the orange one with the star on it, put out a reprint in 1984. And it had a little bit of a bio about Polley himself. And then I was convinced by the University of Tennessee in 2008 to put out an annotated version. So some of you have seen that, where, silly me, I thought it would be a simple process of taking this book and then annotating his quotes that he used. He really loved bad Victorian poetry and the Vulgate version of the Bible. I don't know why. The Methodist quoting the Catholic version of the Bible all the way through his letters. You know, Vale of Tears does not appear in the King James Bible, but it's in the Vulgate that, you know, St. Jerome wrote underneath the church in Bethlehem. So anyway, I thought that'd be simple. 900 and something footnotes later, I realized I will never do this again as long as I live. It's kind of a shame because they don't actually have this in print anymore. I found that out. That's another one of those books I was going to bring to you, and I've now discovered they don't print it anymore. We'll talk about that at the end. But through all of this, the reprints, the publication, who's Charming Nellie? Nobody answered that question. Now, we know very well who J.B. Polley was. Joseph Bailey Polley, born in Texas about 1840, went to school in North Alabama at Florence Wesleyan Academy, where a lot of future Confederate leaders and Confederate soldiers went to school. When the war started, he was an ardent secessionist. He very quickly signed up with Company F, the Mustang Grays of the 4th Texas Infantry, Hood's Texas Brigade. He became a sergeant, mostly working with quartermaster work, but there's some definite battle narratives in there. And then the road for him ended at a place called Darbyton Heights in October of 1864. Hood's Texas Brigade charged Union units armed with 7-shot repeaters. As Polley wrote, I never saw so many bullets in the air at once in my life. He, with his friends, turned to bolt, found a convenient tree, realized he was about the 4th guy standing in line behind that tree, and the bullets were beginning to get the range. So as the last guy in, he has to be the first guy out, and he took off running. He was hit in the foot, fell down. He asked Jack Sutherland for help. Jack just mutely pointed to the bullet-shattered shoulder that he had just suffered. Then he asked Dry Kindred, his captain, for assistance, and Dry Kindred pointed to his own bullet wounds. And so he said, as he wrote later, I had to get up and run on that foot, which he did. He bolted for about 100 yards to cover the timberline, and the next day had that foot amputated. So that was the end of his military service, and he comes home with one leg. So not being a good farming anymore and not much of a rancher, if you only got one leg, he became an attorney. I always loved that transition. Well, I know what I can do. I can be a lawyer. But he was a very good lawyer, very popular, very successful. He also rose in the ranks of the veterans organizations. He'll end up being commander of the Texas Division of the United Confederate Veterans. And here he is at a reunion in Floresville, Texas, county seat of Wilson County, where he was raised. And he is actually on the far left. He's the first male if you come in from your left. In the hat, that's J.B. Polley standing on his artificial foot. Sorry, I have to tell somebody. He and William Cabell got in a dancing contest in 1895. And according to all accounts, Polley was winning till his foot fell off. Probably in the corner, rolling her eyes, was his fiancée, later his wife. She's standing at his left side in this picture. That's Mattie Leggett. How many ever been to Seguin and seen the Sebastopol house, the concrete house? That's her childhood home. She grew up there. So she has her own Texas roots. So anyway, that's J.B. Polley. He'll die in 1918. Having been a very successful fellow as a veterans leader, as a politician of sorts, local, as an attorney, and of course, as an author. The guy who wrote Soldier's Letters to Charming Nellie. But what he never told us was who the heck is Charming Nellie. Now, the idea that Nellie didn't exist was something that surfaced during the time he's putting the letters out. And he really never addressed that issue very much. There were people writing saying, I don't believe he wrote these letters during the war. I don't believe they're real. And part of my evidence is the fact that he completely fabricated Charming Nellie. If they're right, that would undercut the authenticity of the letters, wouldn't it? If there was never a Charming Nellie. So I think this was something important, and I was very well aware of that when I was putting together my edition of Polley's letters. And I never found who Charming Nellie was. That was one of those things I just had to grit my teeth and say, I'm sorry, folks, but here's the letters. Here's everything I can tell you about J.B. Polley. I still don't know who Nellie was. And I wasn't going to say it out loud, but I also don't even know if she existed. Remember, if she's imaginary, then are the letters real? Now, did Polley ever say anything? Well, in 1896, and that's the edition I have of this Confederate Veteran, which, as y'all well know, is a very popular magazine among the Confederate veterans. They had all kinds of news and notes and all kinds of reminiscences and what's going on in the local UDC camps. It's an absolute gold mine of information, and it is online with an index, thank goodness. He mentioned in 1896 that Nellie was, quote, an intimate friend, close quotes, of another young lady to whom I wrote, he said, frequently before, during, and after the war. Well, there's a couple of things that are interesting about this sentence. He is referring to a fiancée whose name I still have not ever found. This also explains why the original letters from Charming Nellie don't exist. I can't find them. If anybody's got them, I'll be very surprised. I think Mattie took one look at him as they were getting married in 1866 and said, you need to ditch those letters right now. So he had his letters to her, but I think Charming Nellie's letters in the fireplace, out in the horse shed, I don't know, wherever they went, they're just not there. So he was making oblique references, I think, with Mattie standing behind his shoulder saying, what you writing there? Okay, an unnamed fiancé was a mutual friend. So I think that's how he became involved with writing to Nellie. More importantly, in the same edition, 1896, there's a picture of Charming Nellie. I had her at the intro of this, with an explanatory note from a mutual friend named Harriet Talbot. Now, she lived in Galveston, quite outspoken lady. If you go online, you'll find a very sharp-toned letter she wrote to some guy named Teddy Roosevelt in about 1901 on how he didn't truly appreciate Southern heritage. She apparently was quite a firm character. But Harriet writes that she knew Nellie quite well during the war, and she's the one that provides the picture we have. But she didn't tell us her name. He didn't give any identifying details except for this portrait that, of course, Polley will then use again in his 1908 book. And in that 1908 book, again, which is in front of you, he told us that Nellie lived in Texas. He told us that she had married a former Confederate officer. who had served in the Tennessee Army, and that she was still alive in 1908 and was happy with her children and grandchildren near her. Well, great. What's her name? Where does she live? Well, she lives in Texas. So he's playing it very coy, isn't he? A solution then appeared, though. May have been one of y'all who told me to go look, but after I published the giant 2008 edition, the centennial edition of Polley's letters, I found the letter where he tells his friend Frank Chilton who Charming Nellie is. This is Frank B. Chilton. He served briefly in Hood's Texas Brigade and then was very active in Veterans Affairs after the war and compiled some amazing materials in his collection of papers and a scrapbook that are at the Texas collection at Baylor University. So Chilton was somebody Polley had served with in Hood's Texas Brigade. He was a post-war partner in writing the history of the Texas Brigade and keeping their organization and their stories alive. And so who else might he write this letter to? In January 1908, when the book is about to come out, Polley writes to Chilton, and this is saved in Chilton's papers, that he would certainly send a copy of his forthcoming book to the lady who had originally received the letters. Drum roll, please, right? Mrs. Frank Holt, who lived on Bay Prairie on the edge of the Caney Valley lands in Matagorda County. Now, this is a period map. If you see the word Matagorda, which is easy for you to see, you go straight up from the G, you'll see something that says Bay City. Just north of Bay City in tiny print, as one of the stops on that railroad line, you'll see Bay Prairie. There's a little community there named Caney today. Not much left of it, but there's little pieces of it. So we know that she's Mrs. Frank Holt. We know she lives in Bay Prairie in Matagorda County. But who the heck is Frank Holt? I looked. There is no Frank Holt of the correct age and color, because you got to take those into account. Probably not an African American who served as an officer in the Confederate Army of Tennessee. Nobody's there to be Charming Nellie's spouse in the Texas census for the last part of the 19th century or the first decades of the 20th century. So I've gone from one stone wall to the next one. Who's Frank Holt? By the way, if this is a second map I brought just in case it wasn't clear enough, again, go up from the G, you'll see Bay City, and then above the C in Bay City, you'll see Bay Prairie. And that's where Charming Nellie is going to be living. And we'll find out more in a second. So, how am I going to solve this riddle? Thank you, Mr. Internet. Some of you well know it has transformed your genealogical, military, historical research, hasn't it? I can do 80% of a book now without ever getting out of my chair at my house. There's a few things we still have to go look at the local history collection, but we can get a lot of stuff done at the desk. And guess what I found? There's Frank. His real name is Jonathan Francis Holt. And that's the obituary that appeared in the Matagorda County Tribune about Jonathan Francis Holt on April the 1st, 1921. And no, it was not an April Fool's joke. It's a great obituary. There's a Matagorda County transcript site where a lot of people like you, like me, have put things together and then graciously put it online. So thank you to those people. But here's the picture of the original, which is on the portal to Texas History. It tells me that, quote, Jonathan Francis Holt was known as, quote, Frank, as his intimates were wont to call him. We got Frank Holt, don't we? Even better, he had been an officer in the 6th Texas Infantry, served in Granbury's Brigade of the Army of Tennessee. We have our Tennessee Confederate officer, don't we? It tells us further that Frank was survived by his wife, the former Nell Wilkinson, who he had married in 1866, and their two married daughters, who together had at least four of their own daughters by 1908 when Polley published his book. Holt lived at Tanglewild, an estate in Matagorda County, and his wife Nellie and one daughter continued to live there at the time. Actually, they got that wrong. The daughter was just visiting. They are doing just fine. I have two pictures of Tanglewild here from our friend Mr. Internet. Two comments. We're not really sure this is Tanglewild. Somebody else did think it was. If it is, you can tell in the two different periods, there's obviously been some serious expansion and construction, right? Which I would argue point out that Frank and Nellie were doing quite well. This house pre-exists the Civil War, by the way. They will live in it. It's now gone. It does not survive today. There's some very sad pictures of the piles of bricks and tangles of brush on the property. I have no idea what happened to it. Here's the clincher. That's Frank's gravestone. Buried next to him is Nellie. They called her Nellie. Now, her full name was Helen Wilkinson Holt, and she signed her own name, Nellie, in the papers that are also with this transcript of her husband's service. She wrote a paper on his service after he passed away in 1921, and she signed it Nellie Wilkinson. There's also a wartime letter on that same website. She signed it Nellie Wilkinson. She hadn't married him yet. She refers directly to Harriet Talbot in that letter. She refers directly to Harriet Talbot's brother, Gale Talbot, who we'll come back to in a minute. And she has a lot of details then in the stuff she has on this website, all about her husband's service. I think we found Charming Nellie, right? Put it all together, that's who it is. She's buried, as I said, alongside her husband. Doesn't say Charming Nellie. That was Polley's name for her. I don't know if Frank ever called her Charming. Polley called her Charming because he said she wrote such friendly and entertaining letters during the war. So what does this give us? Well, it gives us a new dimension to what Polley writes in these letters many times over. If you read those letters, you get the impression that Nellie had a quite idyllic life. She had a great time at home in the Civil War. A charming life, if you will. I had to, sorry. Polley remarked in her letters that she had an attractive, quote-unquote, lifestyle at home in Texas. He bemusedly declined her invitation to a dance in June of 1862. So you would ordinarily get the impression that she's doing pretty well at home. Things are okay in Texas. Now, another thing that he writes very spiteful comments on the, quote, stay-at-homes. The young men who enlisted in local defense units. He refers to them as the gallant coast catamounts, making fun of a lot of their ferocious militia company names. The coast catamounts, gallant coast catamounts. He derided them, how's that for a fancy scholarly term, for their, quote, featherbed patriotism. And talked about to her how they spent their days dancing, eating, and napping. While he and others risked their lives on distant battlefields. He wrote in December 1863 from East Tennessee, where he and his comrades were starving, and they'd already been defeated several times over that season, and it was bitterly cold, that he wished he could, quote, cheerfully and even gladly exchange with these gentlemen. Keep that in mind when I tell you some of these sad tales you're fixing to hear. What you need to know now is once you find out who Charming Nellie is, you begin to find out that her life was not so charming. She had a pretty rough time and might add a different dimension then to the letters. She was born in Texas in October 1839, probably in Matagorda County. Her parents had come downriver from Tennessee. Her dad was John Wilkinson. He was born in North Carolina, but he met her mother, Ann, in Tennessee, and they had settled there. They came down the Mississippi River, we think, by flatboat, came across to Matagorda County by schooner. They already had one child, Maria Louisa, and Ann was born in 1838 in Matagorda County, and then in 1839, Charming Nellie was born in Matagorda County. In 1840, John Wilkinson died. So Nellie lost her father when she was just a year old. By 1850, her widowed mother is living with the older sister, Maria Louisa, and her husband, a fellow named John Graham, who was a sailor. They lived elsewhere in Matagorda County, and with them was Charming Nellie, her older sister by 1 year, Ann, and then the Grahams had a little son. Now, Maria Louisa becomes the key to the tale from this point forward. She's the older sister who's married to the sailor. She had a second son in the early 1850s, and then both children died, probably due to cholera, yellow fever, but they both died of disease before 1853. We know that because in 1853, her husband accidentally shot himself. They amputated his arm, which had been shattered, and then he died from the results of the surgery. So Charming Nellie, at the age of 12, is living with a widowed older sister who has buried her husband and 2 children. Doesn't sound terribly charming so far, does it? By 1860, Maria Louisa had remarried. She married a man 30 years older than her. His name was William G. Warren, and he owned Tanglewild. That's how the Holts will come to be at Tanglewild. Maria Louisa, older sister, marries the owner of Tanglewild, and all of them move into Tanglewild. She was not very healthy. Maria Louisa was not very healthy. So Nellie and her sister Ann ran the household, mostly Nellie. I guess it just devolved on her as the youngest sister. By this time, she would have been, approximately 20 years old. Also explains why she's not married. She's taking care of an ill and perhaps very unhappy older sister and running this plantation, which had over 100 slaves. It is a large operation. And of course, William G. Warren, who's perfectly healthy, but it takes a lot more hands than just himself. So Nellie is there running the household. We know this from some of the letters she wrote, which includes her older sister, her younger sister, her mother, her sister's husband, 2 nieces, Maddie and S.C. Warren, and running a plantation at Tanglewild of about 100 slaves. Like I said, Nellie spends a lot of time taking care of Maria Louisa and the place. And it's not a very happy story. Niece Maddie Warren married Gail Talbot. Remember Harriet Talbot's brother? Then gives birth to a son and dies 2 weeks later, in November of 1862, leaving an infant child to now be taken care of at Tanglewild. At about that time, yellow fever swept through, by that time I mean 1862, yellow fever swept through Matagorda County. They say because it came ashore with a blockade runner owned by one Albert Wadsworth. He had been the former mayor of what's now Matagorda. In that yellow fever epidemic, Albert Wadsworth, his wife, and his wife's mother all died, leaving 5 orphans. Guess where they came to live? Nellie has a very busy life, doesn't she? And not one attended by many happy events. It's kind of a wonder after a while you begin to realize that she wrote anything happy to Polley. Maybe that was her escape. That was the way she took a little break from taking care of 5 Wadsworth orphans, a niece who will go on off to school at Chapel Hill, but leaving behind the orphaned child of the other sister. So Nellie, despite her busy life, found Frank Holt. Sorry, the picture isn't any better. This is the best I could get. Frank Holt, he's a Yankee. He was born in Andover, Massachusetts in April 1838. Moved to Matagorda County when he was 12 years old. By that time, he'd lost his daddy. He moved in with his uncle, a fellow named John Plunkett, who was a native of Ireland and the brother of Frank Holt's mother. So Frank, his mother, several others move in with John Plunkett, who operated a large farm in Matagorda County. And by 1860, Frank had studied pharmacy and was working as a clerk in a local store. You know, it would have been a quiet life, but then the war came. Notice then that both he and Nellie shared being fatherless and losing their fathers at a very young age. So in July 1861, the war breaks out and he joins the Matagorda Coast Guards, also known as Company D of the 6th Texas Infantry. They fought in several different spots, but most notably, they will end up at Arkansas Post in late 1862. Some of you are already going, oh man, this isn't going to end well. Yeah. Arkansas Post was surrendered in January 1863, so Frank Holt becomes a prisoner. He spent 3 months in various prison camps and then was shipped to City Point, Virginia for exchange. That was the big place where they sent a lot of them. It's interesting that while he was there, rumors flew that the Arkansas Post exchange prisoners were going to be assigned to a new Texas division in the Army of Northern Virginia. And who was going to command that division? John Bell Hood. So there was a moment in which Frank, Charming Nellie's future husband, was going to serve in the same division with J.B. Polley, but it didn't work out that way. In fact, J.B. Polley actually mentioned that in some of his letters about how our fellow Texans surrendered Arkansas Post are going to join us now. No, they didn't. They were sent out to join Hiram Granberry's brigade in the Army of Tennessee. Holt will go to lieutenant. He'll end up a lieutenant. And then at Jonesboro, Georgia, in July of 1864, that's during the fighting for Atlanta, he was shot in the right arm. Shattered the arm. They resected it. For those of you who don't know what resected is, they pull out the bad parts and stick everything above it and below it together, stitch it together, and hope the nerves work. Yeah. It didn't. So after the resection, he was furloughed home. He endured 2 more resections. 3 resections. They wouldn't take it off. They just kept cutting a piece out and sticking it back on him. Bless his heart. You know, and that's the soft bless his heart. Finally, doctors by 1866 decided that his newer, shorter, weaker arm, that's about all he's going to have, so they left him alone. So Frank Holt is home now with a very not good arm, having endured 3 operations. And remember, there's not a whole lot of anesthetic or anything, just to give you a grim thought. And that's when he and Charming Nellie decide to tie the knot. Now that means poor Charming Nellie back home on the farm has not only endured by mail the maiming of her fiancé, Frank Holt, but she's also endured the maiming of her pen pal, J.B. Polley, because he's gotten his leg amputated, or at least the lower portion of his leg, after his foot was shattered at Darbyton Heights in October 1864. But there's more to come. Remember, I already mentioned that Mattie Warren Talbot, one of the nieces, died in 1862. Then there's the Matagorda incident, January 3rd, 1864. We actually have a THC marker for that. This is a picture of the dedication of the marker in 2016. What happened is, and I'll let Nellie take the lead in this, she wrote in January 1864 to Sally Wadsworth, one of the orphans who is now at school in Chapel Hill, Texas, that her brother Thomas Wadsworth had died. Now, William B. Wadsworth, the oldest brother, the oldest son of the former mayor that had died of yellow fever, had joined Company D with Frank Holt. So he's gone off with him to Arkansas Post and to serve under Hiram Granberry. But Tom was only 16 years old when the war started, so he joined a local militia company, the Caney Mounted Rifles. When Union troops landed on the coast of Texas, down around Brownsville, they pushed on up the coast in the fall of 63, early December of 63, all the way up to Matagorda Bay. Well, the Confederates didn't want them on Matagorda Bay for obvious reasons, so the Caney Mounted Rifles and others were gathered to try and drive the Union troops back. So they load them on a steamboat named the John F. Carr. Any of y'all are really fanatics about Texas history, you'll know the John F. Carr is one of those steamboats they used to retake Galveston on January 1, 1863. So once again, they pile cotton bales up on this thing, go out to the island, and that failed miserably. So the commander of the Caney Mounted Rifles said, "We'll take it." He loaded his men in 3 rowboats, and they rowed out across Matagorda Bay on December the 30th, 1863, in the middle of a winter storm. This is not going well, is it? He did have enough sense to call off the attack, and so the 3 rowboats turned to try to get back to Matagorda. 2 made it. One of the rowboats sank. John F. Carr was not able to return all of them. 2 brothers drowned. 19 others managed to swim ashore, and one of them was Tom Wadsworth. And then he subsequently died of exposure, as did 18 of his comrades. So 22 young, what Polley call them, coastal catamounts, who were enjoying their napping and snacking and their dances, died of exposure or drowning in an effort to drive Union troops away. Nellie apparently never mentioned this to Polley. She probably understood. He didn't need to have news like that. But that's what's going on in her life. She's writing a letter to Sally that her brother Tom had drowned in a futile effort to drive away Union troops on the Texas coast. By the way, among those who made it ashore and intact was Gale Talbot, Harriet Talbot's brother. And he also had things to do to write about the fiasco. Harriet, by the way, this is why she never married. She was affianced to Tom. And according to family lore, when he died of exposure, she just was so bereaved that she never married. Now, to add to their grief, another orphan, Ruth, will die of a congestive chill in July of 1864. She was 10 years old. So that's Charming Nellie's charming life during the Civil War. She lost nieces, she lost orphans that she was supposed to help care for, she lost a lot. It's amazing, like I said, that she kept up her positive tone. Despite the wartime troubles, though, she and Frank Holt, like Polley, will actually have a very long and successful post-war life. So now I've added Frank to the Tanglewild picture, because this is where they're going to settle. Remember, that's his estate when his obituary is written in 1921. So Nellie and Frank, once he gets over having his arm cut off 3 different times, will marry on the 4th of November, 1866, and they settle near Tanglewild, I guess so she can kind of keep an eye out. Warren, William G. Warren, the fellow who actually owned Tanglewild, died in 1868. At that point, I think this is when the Holts, Charming Nellie and Frank, move into Tanglewild. At that point, Frank was the farm manager. Warren had gotten very old, and so Frank was running the operations for his sister-in-law, Maria Louisa. So it seems kind of natural that they would just move on into the house and make it their headquarters. Maria Louisa will live till 1882. And I've looked at the wills and I've looked at all this. It's not very clear, but I'm going to take a guess that she left it to her oldest daughter, who was only 21 years of age. What is a 21-year-old unmarried young lady going to do with a huge operation like this? So I think there was a business deal made. I would use possibly the verb, she sold it to the Holts, because it becomes their property as far as the tax records are concerned from about that point forward. So the Holts are now living in Tanglewild. By 1882, they own Tanglewild. Frank is a farmer. He raises cattle. There's a host of African American laborers, tenant farmers probably, sharecroppers. But he's also active in other things. Despite his poor health, I mean, he looks, I wish I could find a better picture of him, but he became a county commissioner for Matagorda County, served a term or two. He became involved in development efforts. Frank will become the president of the Colorado Canal Company. That is the recurring dream all along our Texas rivers, is to straighten them out, be able to use them for navigation and irrigation. Well, this is one of many such schemes in Matagorda County, and their target was rice farmers. He was one of those that was experimenting with irrigation for rice farms. And any of y'all ever been dealing with rice farms, you need a lot of water. And then you drain it all off and do it all over again next year. So that's what he was involved in. He also joined the Matagorda Lodge, number 47 of the International Order of Odd Fellows. Why didn't he become a Mason? I mean, a guy who's a county commissioner, who is involved in economic development, who has property, a man of great distinction, why would he not become a Mason? It's the absolute same reason J.B. Polley never became a Mason. In the 19th century and well into the 20th century, unless you were sound of mind and body, you could not be a Mason. So if you ever wondered why your ancestor who lost a limb in the Civil War, or worse, maybe an eye, this is why they didn't become Masons. So would they join? The Odd Fellows, the Knights of Pythias, all these different other groups. It was the heyday of fraternities. And so, of course, Frank Holt, busy man, would become involved in the Odd Fellows. He also became involved in St. Mark's Church over in Bay City. He became senior warden after serving many years on the vestry of St. Mark's Episcopal Church. Tanglewild became the place where, when the Texas bishop came to visit, he stayed at Tanglewild, where Charming Nellie was his hostess. And there were about a half dozen bishops who stayed several nights and enjoyed the hospitality of Charming Nellie and her husband, Frank Holt. So they're doing okay, aren't they? Wartime, I gave you a little black cloud, so now it's a little better. A little better. Did they have children? Yes, they did. They had two daughters, Anne Elizabeth Holt, whom they called Bessie. She was born in 1874. And then their little sister was Louisa Warren Holt, was born in 1876. Notice the closeness of her name to the older sister, Maria Louisa Warren. She is Louisa Warren Holt. What happens to Bessie? Well, Bessie marries Edward Kilbride, who became a successful merchant and a rancher. When they married in 1894, Frank, to show you how well Frank and Charming Nellie were doing, they built them a beautiful 2-story home on the property and then deeded them 80 acres. It's called Wood Edge. 16 years later, the Kilbrides built a beautiful home in Bay City, which now has a historical marker on it and survives to this day. So, happy times for Charming Nellie. These two they'll have children, they'll have grandchildren for Charming Nellie and Grandpa Frank. Louise married James S. Mayfield, who's the grandson of a very controversial early Texas politician of the same name. Look him up sometime. Fun story. Guy had a problem with shooting people. But it's a very charming story about how that Louisa and James S. Mayfield married, quote, just at sunrise in the front parlor at Tanglewild. It sounds idyllic. It sounds great. They'll have 3 daughters by the time Polley publishes his book, Louise, Helen, and Cornelia. They'll spend a lot of time at Tanglewild with the doting grandparents. And of course, before Frank passed away, he and Charming Nellie became great-grandparents. Their great-grandparents in 1920, when granddaughter Cornelia had her first son. So good times, right? After the war, they enjoyed, do the math, about 55 years of good times at Tanglewild. First as working for the older sister and her husband, and then becoming themselves the proprietors, the owners, and the gracious host and hostess of Tanglewild Plantation. So the end of the road comes, as it always does. March 31st, 1921, Frank passed away. Charming Nellie will survive him by another 7 years, during which time, as I told you, she writes a brief history of his Civil War service, which she left with the local historical society. And she died on May the 4th, 1928, at the age of 88 years of age. Now, by that time, Polley had passed away 7 years earlier. 10 years earlier. History prof, not math. Polley had died in 1918. How many times did Polley see Charming Nellie? 3. He only met her 3 times, by his own account. Now, maybe he's lying, because you never know. Maddie might get mad. But he did not actually meet her face to face until March 1865, and their paths crossed 2 times after that. I mean, Maddie's not a monster. She's just a very protective wife. By the way, if you go to Whitehall, Polley's house, you know this. She took her wedding ring or her engagement ring and carved her initials in the glass in one of the windows there. And it's still there to this day. Oh man, talk about giving shivers when you see something like that. But there is a question unanswered. So if he only met her 3 times in his life, how on earth did they ever get together? How did she get her name, much less her address, where she lived? Obviously, they had mutual friends. That's easy to say. Maybe the first point of contact is when Polley is at school in Alabama, at Florence Academy, which is now University of North Alabama. There were lots of people from his area, from the Texas coast, of that station, and obviously Nellie isn't going to be one that has that kind of money, but the Talbots or others, mutual acquaintances. And so he and Nellie had many common associates, most notably probably Harriet Talbot. Now, of course, I'm going to repeat, Polley said that he got her name from his anonymous fiancée. Someday, perhaps I'll figure out who that was, and that'll tie that link. But right now, I'm just very happy to be able to tell you who Charming Nellie is. I think knowing who Charming Nellie is adds an important dimension to the letters that he refers to and the letters he wrote to her. I think it fleshes out the story, knowing exactly what happened, really, in their lives, both during the war, but also before and after. It's only fitting that their names and their stories should be told together. And that's why I'm going to add another happy ending. I told you the University of Tennessee no longer has these letters in print. I was shocked to find this out. They didn't tell me. Rude. So I contacted them and said, if you're not going to do anything with them, can I have them back? So they're writing me a letter and they're transferring the copyright to me. And sometime next year, because we are doing a big push to try and put out reprints, there will be another edition of Charming Nellie's letters to Charming Nellie, excuse me. And this one will have the article on who Charming Nellie was as the introduction. So for the first time, we're going to have an edition of Letters to Charming Nellie that actually tells you who the heck Charming Nellie is. And all the details you just heard, and maybe even a few of the pictures, will be there so people can have that part of the story as well. Well, thank you for listening to me.